Hello! Welcome to Deadly Monsters for Dungeon Masters, also known as DM4DM. I am Chryolain, DM of Starlost Seas. With me is my buddy and fellow DM, Eyan. Eyan, what are we doing here?
All right, so we kind of talked about in the resolutions video, guys. This is going to be the first video we put out of DM4DM, where we took 4 randomized monsters that we generated right after we released the resolutions video. The goal is, at the end of this video, we will then generate 4 more that we'll talk about for the next one. But we wanted to go ahead and have the monsters ready for us so we could go ahead and look at them and kind of come up with a real easy way to have these monsters ready and available to talk about. So the 4 monsters that we actually ended up generating, do you want to do them all in order, or do you just want to list them all, or one at a time, Cry? What do you think we want to do here?
You know, let's do them in the order they were generated in.
Okay, I don't remember what order that was, so let me pull that up.
I got you.
Cool.
We had the Dredge, the Lost Sorrowsworn, a Fire Elemental, which I am recently familiar with, and a Magma Method. Method.
How many of these monsters have you encountered before, Cryo?
As a player, I have only encountered an elemental that was not fire, and as a DM, I have only ever used the fire elemental. So I'm 1 for 4 on this.
So for me, I've encountered fire elementals, obviously.
Yeah.
And Magma Methods, I technically played a Pathfinder game once that I encountered methods in.
Never actually played Pathfinder.
Yeah, it's a whole different action economy, and there's a whole lot that goes with it. But I guess technically I encountered the monster, but it wasn't in D&D, so I get to kind of see the differences.
Fair.
I've never ran into Dredges, and I'd never even heard of the Lost before we randomized that, man.
It's really neat, though.
Yeah.
So let's start with the Dredge, which I know you mentioned beforehand that we really want to look into the Dredge, because it gave the Dredge sort of a look over, and it's not great.
It doesn't have a whole lot going for it. Yeah, no.
It doesn't have
a whole lot going for it. I have another, before we really jump into it.
Oh, yeah? Yeah?
How do you determine the hit points for your monsters? Do you just go based off the stat block?
Well, so here's the thing. I go initially based off the stat block, and then I have marked down some of your guys' hits that you've done in the past, and I kind of average out a damage thing, and I think, how quickly could y'all one-shot this? And then I might fidge the numbers a bit to make it so you don't one-shot everything on the board, unless that's what I'm going for.
Right.
But no, the HP is really one of those things, in my opinion, as a DM, that it's important that you have a number going in.
Yeah.
But that number doesn't have to stay that number after the first turn if you decide that combat is going to be not fun because of that number.
Yeah, I specifically showed you that one video we saw where they put that 1 in front of the number. Yeah, I always like to roll mine beforehand. I actually like to roll each individual monster, and that helps me determine which monster is which, so I don't get them confused like in a combat setting. I always say, hey, this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, this is number 4. And then I make sure I keep those in a line so I know exactly how much HP they have left.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, if I put them all the same, it's hard for me to remember how much damage has been done to each one, and I can always look at that base HP and know, hey, that was number 2.
You'll notice between turns, when I'm DMing, will have just a long chunk of time when numbers are being calculated, and it's because I'm putting it all in on like a doc where I keep all of the numbers straight, so that you guys aren't fighting something for 11 turns.
I mean,
or maybe you are.
11 turn fights happen, right? I mean, those things happen. All right, well, let's dive into Dredges now that I've gotten that out of the way.
11 turn fights aren't gonna happen with the Dredge. The Dredge is a small fiend.
No.
Chaotic evil. It's only got an AC of 11. The recommended hit points are 4d6 plus 4, average of 18. And its stats are middling or bad.
Yeah, it really only has one.
It only has one positive.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. Yeah. It does have an immunity going for it though, which is not something you see along a lot of lines of CR
weaker monsters.
CR
yeah,
1/4 CR monsters. So it does have an immunity going on, but
how many players rock a poison
not
at that
level,
low of a level?
Not at that level. So
it's cool that it has it. Is it ever going to affect combat? Probably not.
Probably not. No.
So it's got multi-attack, which that's something that's good. That's going for it.
It's got +2 to hit though, so it needs multi-attack. I mean, the Dredge overall, from what we can tell, is a monster you're definitely gonna be throwing a lot of at your party. I think a multi-stage combat with it would be the best way to go. You don't just want to go in and throw 10 Dredges at your party, unless that's your goal. You don't really just want to go and throw 10. You kind of want to, maybe you make it a cave encounter, right? And as they progress through, they run into sets of 3 or of 5. And you can do it a multi-stage as you go through encounter. But
True. Could do like an ambush. You start with 1 or 2, and then a bigger group appears, or maybe they get to ambush 1 or 2 of them, and depending on how well the ambush goes, others come in. It's a lower level, smaller thing. You're probably gonna have it be backup for something bigger. That's probably the best way to run the Dredge if you want to run it as is without doing homebrew stuff to it. It does have a neat ability. It's called its Fetid Cloud. It's once a day. It's a 10-foot radius, which isn't a lot, but it's going to catch all of your melee fighters. And anytime that they start the turn in that area and fail a con save, they're poisoned. But this poison that they have, it just gives you disadvantage on rolls and ability checks, which is good, especially if you're fighting a lot of them.
Well, that's not true, actually. So it actually goes farther than that with the Dredge. The Dredge actually makes it where you can't take both an action and a bonus action.
True.
And you can't use reactions. So it does have that going for it, which at that level, though, most of your guys aren't going to have bonus actions and reactions to be using. So would be a good thing, like you said, to pair with something a little heavier on, especially if you wanted to do like a level 5 to level 7 encounter. Just to throw these in there just to kind of have that little stipple. But
I could even see a Dredge pulling up at a higher level, and like, let's say you're fighting something crazy. Let's say you're fighting like a Demi-Lich or something, and it's already stupid difficult to beat and probably has 2 other stupid difficult to beat monsters with it. And then just throw in 10 Dredge that run around. They're not going to hit your players. And if they do, they're only going to do at most 6 damage. But I could see getting your reactions and bonus actions nerfed in that kind of fight as a huge game changer.
So I thought of a really cool idea of using them too. So I was thinking about it.
Ooh.
What if you had a warlock whose patron was an archfiend, right?
Okay.
Well, these are small fiends. What if that patron is sending these Dredges to your party to bring a message to the warlock or whatever? Your party doesn't know. And they're constant. Yeah, so like they don't understand why, but randomly you'll just have this group of Dredges that are, and they'll all just they'll start attacking them because they don't know.
That's amazing. Oh, I would love that actually.
All right, well let's talk about how we're gonna make this deadly, Cryo. I did a cool thing in our homebrew before with an Onkeg where I made a queen version of it, and I want to do something similar with this. I wouldn't really call it a king per se, but maybe it's like a Dredge champion or something like that. But we have to think, what would it have? How do we make this better?
You could even do like criteria. Like it could be like a Dredge warrior, Dredge like champion, like a few stages of it. I would say lean more into the poison. I would say give them an ability that lets them not only do the disadvantage poison, but a damage over time poison. Because
maybe like you said, instead of maybe you just add that in with it. Maybe it just does that.
Because that would be fit. Because damage over time is one of those things that if you apply it to your players, it's going to change the entire flow of combat. Because there are some... I've had players, as you've seen if you watch Starlost, who just don't get hit. Like, it just doesn't happen. or they get hit a few times and they're totally fine. Like Twink, I've hit Twink with 13 plus damage on one turn one time and applied like prone to him, and then you just got up the next turn and we're fine. But damage over time is one of those things that players are going to constantly have to consider for the rest of the fight.
I'm trying to think of what would its action be. If it's this champion, I would say it would have some sort of call to arms ability where it maybe lets out a roar, and that roar either puts you at disadvantage on your next turn or gives all of its allies advantage.
That would be good, especially with other Dredge that are already going to be struggling to hit the player.
Yep.
Having one of them that just roars and all of them have advantage for the next round would be a big thing. You'll find a lot as a DM and as a player. Advantage and disadvantage, it sounds like it's not that big a deal. Like you're like, oh, I have disadvantage for a turn. That's not that bad. That can be a huge difference. So having something that gives players advantage or disadvantage is really critical. So you want to think a lot about that if you're homebrewing something.
On top of that, I think I'd also maybe make it multi-attack would be 3 attacks. And what I would do is instead of the claws, I'd give it a weapon. It's going to have a weapon of some kind, probably a mace, maybe, I don't know, maybe a wagon wheel. Who knows?
Oh,
I'm gonna give it a weapon of some kind. It probably get its melee bonus up to probably a +4 to hit, maybe +5 even, depending on what level the party is. But I'm gonna give it, a bite attack and then 2 attacks with that weapon is probably what I'm gonna do.
And that seems like a really solid buff to me. That combined with some allies that it can buff as needed could make this
it could turn
a deadly monster.
Could turn the encounter pretty deadly pretty quickly if you're not careful. So I don't know. I think that's I think it would be a good way to introduce that to a party if you wanted to use it as like a boss, like mini boss.
Oh yeah. I would, especially though, if you're gonna do that, I'd personally have them earlier in the session or the session before encounter a Dredge, like a regular Dredge or a few regular Dredges. Gives them an idea of how they work and how the cloud works and things to avoid. And also, what it does is, if you have a bunch of these little enemies and you go into this room expecting to fight a bunch of them, and there's one big one, it's a nice moment for the players to just be like, oh no,
yeah,
there's a big Dredge now.
Yep. All right.
So what we have next on this is one that neither of us had even heard of.
Yeah, I'd never even heard of this.
The Lost Sorrow Man.
Yeah, the Lost Sorrow Sworn. It's from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, so it's probably why we'd never heard of it. It's kind of a newer book, I would say. It's not new, but newer.
I have heard the name before, but I know nothing about that book or what it has.
I mean, yeah, I didn't realize. Yeah, no, I'd never seen this before. I'd never heard of it before, and I'll be honest, it scares the shit out of me. It terrifies me as both a player and DM. It is such a scary monster. But it's definitely mid-level campaign. You're going to be 8 to 12 when you're trying to fight this thing. And there's going to be multiple of them. But I thought of a really cool way that we can kind of deal with this. If you read the description of it, the description goes as follows. Emotion given form. Each Sorrowsworn personifies a different aspect of despair or distress. Immediately I think of Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, right? They're all named something else, right? So I immediately thought of that. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna have a group of these things, and they're each gonna embody a different emotion.
Like a different carnal fear of some kind.
Perhaps you send your quest on a party to a tomb or to a ruin somewhere, and they unleash this group of Sorrowsworn, right? And they get out into the world, and then their quest for the length of the campaign would be to track them down, find them, to hunt them, village to village. They have to discern which, I say this, they have to discern which emotion each one goes with. Because at the bottom of this description it says, giving in to the negative emotions that the Sorrowsworn represent causes these entities to grow deadlier. Fighting against these emotions can weaken them and drive them away. And that's a very important thing you need to make sure you give your players is a chance, at least to learn that information. Perhaps
Oh, yeah.
they don't. You know, maybe they didn't roll high enough. Maybe they didn't try
Maybe
to
they didn't-
read the
yeah.
book.
Maybe they didn't talk to the right NPC.
Maybe they didn't look at the walls and the ruins that describe these monsters. I don't know, but you should make that information available.
That's a key thing with a lot of abilities as far as any creature goes. Telegraphing as a DM is really important. And sometimes, if it's something not super critical, if it's one monster you're going to fight one time, and the players are so close to figuring it out, as a DM personally, sometimes I think it's better to just tell them, especially if it's frustrating them in combat. But something like Ian, like you just suggested, where it's like going to be a campaign-long thing, it's great to work that into the lore and work that into the roleplay and have that be a fun part of fighting these things and figuring these things out.
And perhaps you give them names. Perhaps you give these creatures, maybe they were high-ranking nobles in this failed civilization, and they fell into the pit of darkness, or, you know, made a pact with the goddess of death, or whatever happened to become
You're giving me
the
ideas.
Lost. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this monster very easily could be the big bad
The thing, yeah.
in a short campaign.
Oh, yeah. And here's the thing. As far as making deadly monsters goes, we had to tweak the Dredge. I don't think we have to tweak a single thing about this.
Don't. This is scary.
This thing is scary. It's got bonuses in everything except for wisdom and charisma, which makes sense because it's horrid looking. AC is 15, which, don't get me wrong, it's not the highest AC I've ever seen, but it's certainly not anything to scoff at.
Especially when it already has damage resistances.
It has bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing whenever it's in dim light or darkness. And that's something that you can totally have your players play with, because that gives them a good reason to bring light cantrips that are really not used all that often. It's really used... It can be bad for characters who have dim light abilities. Like, if you're a Twilight Sanctum cleric, you suddenly can't use anything in this fight.
Here's the deal, though. They won't know that going in. Perhaps you run them into a hunter, or, you know, some sort of person who's encountered these before, or that's what they do. And maybe you describe that hunter to them, and maybe they notice they have a moon-touched sword.
Ooh, there you go.
Right? Because you have to, like I said, somehow work that information in to the party so they can learn that. I don't know where to start this, dude.
I would say an interesting thing you could do, still hanging on that, though, if you're doing this with multiple of them across the thing, or even if this is something you just want to do one time but want to do it differently, instead of having this be a creature that's stronger in dim light and darkness, have it be one that's stronger in light. Especially if you've encountered one or two of them in a campaign and then suddenly encounter another one out in the bright light. Your whole party is ready to fight it. They're like, it's out of its element. We've got this. And it's just as tough, if not tougher, than others they've fought. It's going to be a big thing. If it's not a fight they can win, make sure you can telegraph that. Maybe they can leave and then figure some stuff out about this one's different and then come back. It could be really cool. Let's talk about its actual abilities, because that's, oh my.
I mean, it's got a multi-attack like everything. It only gets 2, which isn't crazy, especially for something of this CR. It's a challenge rating 7. It gets +6 to hit, also not crazy, but you got to remember those damage resistances in there. It does do 2d10 +3 damage, though, when it hits with those spikes.
Which can be a lot. That's you're looking at average of 14, and that means if you crit, you're looking at average of 24.
Yeah.
Whew. That can hurt. That can hurt, especially if you're running these things at like between 7 and like 13.
Yep.
Before players get real into resistances and sturdy armor. 20 plus hit points of damage can do a lot. And then there's Embrace, which I love abilities like this.
Yeah.
I've homebrewed it into a creature before. For those of you who've seen Starlost, I homebrewed the Astral Shade, which had a whole ability where it grappled you and then it could negate a bunch of your abilities as long as you were grappled. And so Embrace, +6 to hit, does 4d10s when it does hit, and the target becomes grappled with an escape DC of 14, which isn't bad. But until the grapple ends, the target is frightened, and it will take 27 psychic damage at the end of each of its turns, or 6d8. That's a lot of damage.
Yeah, because you gotta think. You're doing the 4d10 plus 3 on your turn, and then when it gets to its turn, at the end of it, if it doesn't get out of the grapple, it's gonna take another 6d8. That's so much damage.
It's so much. But then, here's where Embrace gets really bad. In the reaction, as long as this thing is grappling you, if any of your party attacks it, it damages you for 4 more d8.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is so bad.
It is.
This thing could, if you put this up against a party that's not ready or is too low level, this could one-shot a person with that ability. No problem.
Yeah, one round. One round of combat, and they're dead.
It would be devastating. So, this thing, super dangerous. I love that we found it. Yeah. I'm horrified if you put it in our home campaign. I play a squishy wizard.
Yeah.
But also, it's so cool that I want to fight it.
It's so cool.
I want this thing to kill me. It's so horrifying.
There's not a whole lot else to say about it. This is already a deadly monster. We don't have to make it any more deadly. I think we just move on.
Fire elemental it is. Fire elemental.
Go ahead and tell us.
So I am recently a big fan of the fire elemental. I pulled fire elementals into Starlost. Go over and watch it. You'll see fire elementals somewhere around like episode 28. It's really cool. They are resistant to all forms of non-physical, non-magical attacks, so bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. Unless it's a magical weapon, they are resistant. They're totally immune to fire and poison. It makes sense. Their body's made of fire. And their stats, their AC is low, but their HP is high, and their speed is high. So they can move around faster than most players do. And I'm going to get right into my favorite ability of them, which is the fire form, which ties right into the speed. This thing can walk through you, which is a strange ability that not a lot of D&D monsters have, but those that have it are usually always going to mess you up when they walk through you, and the fire elemental is no exception. Every time it passes through you, or you start a turn in the same space as it, you will be lit on fire. It's that damage over time I was talking. And so, as soon as you're on fire, you have to take an action to put yourself out, or you'll take a D10 every single turn. Which doesn't sound that bad, because you're like, oh, I'll just step away and I'll put myself out. Until this thing has more speed than you, so you step away, put yourself out, and the very next turn, it just lights you right back on fire.
Yeah. Been there, done that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, and you got to think about it from the other perspective of as a player, you're using an entire action to put yourself out. I mean, you saw. We basically decided to stop doing that. Like we decided that was no longer what we were going to be doing anymore.
Yeah, at some point the whole party just decided to let themselves be on fire, because if you use your action every single turn to put yourself out, you're never going to kill the thing that keeps lighting you on fire. Which is a double-edged sword, and that's the whole point of fighting the fire elemental, is that you have to choose to kill it or to be on fire. Like, you're going to have to choose to be on fire and kill it, or to not be on fire and try and manage that somehow. It's also its normal attack, which is just touch. I kind of flavored it as it's smacking you. That's a +6 to hit and 2d6s of fire damage right off the bat, and also lights you on fire.
Yeah, there's lots of fire.
It's a lot of fire. I apparently like a lot of fire. I don't know why. But it does also have water susceptibility, which is for every 5 feet that it moves through water or every gallon of water splashed on it, it takes a single cold damage, which doesn't sound like a lot, probably because it's not a lot. But if you can set this thing up near a body of water as the DM and give your players the option to go into the body of water, I gave them a whole lake. They did not use it.
We did not use that lake.
But yes. But if you can have this thing fight with your party in some sort of water situation, super easy. Have this thing, suddenly this thing doesn't want to move, because every time it moves, it takes damage. So that mitigates the fact that it's faster than you. And you're also doing damage to it if it decides to move. So it puts your party in a way better position, but I still think that this thing is super dangerous.
Oh, yeah, especially for low mid-level. We were level 5 when we encountered it, so, I mean, you threw multiple of them at us. And
I threw 3. Expected. They did, however, have reduced HP. They all had like 2/3 of the HP that's recommended.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's deadly.
It can be deadly. It almost killed our monk.
Yeah.
So it'll keep your players on their toes, and then it'll set their toes on fire.
It will. It will. In fact, I saw it firsthand. To go along with that, we got the Magma Method. I think the Magma Method could be a good minion to bring with a fire elemental.
It is a small elemental, so it pairs off really well. I've never heard of I've heard of a Magma Method before, because I've heard of methods, but I have never looked at this stat block before we rolled this creature. I think it looks really fun. It does look like a really fun small minion to have around.
Despite its appearance, very deadly. To small,
yeah,
to low level, to low level characters, very deadly.
Oh.
I don't know if you noticed, it gets heat metal,
which is crazy.
Especially
if they have metal armor.
Yeah.
Oof.
That's 2d8 fire damage out the gate immediately.
Oof.
Now,
I did not consider that.
Now, that being said, don't recommend using it for that reason on your low level. If you're gonna bring a Magma Method to your parties, I don't recommend setting their armor to heat metal. What I might recommend, their weapons. Give them the chance to drop their weapons. That's going to change the fight out the gate, because they're no longer armed. They have to wait that turn for that weapon to cool down before they pick it back up. It changes the whole dynamic of it. It also doesn't make you overpowered and kill your party instantly.
True. And I mean, you have to choose one object for heat metal too, if you're playing it by the rules. And this thing can only do it once a day. So let's say you have, Ian, you might be familiar with this. Let's say you have a paladin in your party who is just super cocky, super high AC, does a solid amount of damage with their smites, and they just you really want to give them something interesting to do in a fight other than to just stand there, not get hit, and whack the thing. Heating up their weapon and forcing them to drop it and putting them sort of on a back end with having to fist fight this thing for a turn can be really cool.
Or even their shield. I mean, you lower their AC as soon as they drop it.
That's true.
And it doesn't really hurt them.
Nope. It changes the fight in a way that isn't done with innate damage, which is really interesting. And I think the best way to mix up a fight in D&D is to do things like that.
Yeah. As for Magma Method, I thought of a cool little when could you use it situation. Aside from fire elemental minions, what if you come to a village and a city, a town, wherever, and the local blacksmith hires you to protect his shop because recently there's been a bunch of fires outbreaking at other blacksmiths. Well, lo and behold, it's a Magma Method moving from forge to forge.
Ooh, I like that.
It could be a cool way to introduce it to your characters. It could be a cool little in-city dangerous situation, because when you're in a town in D&D, nobody thinks, I'm in danger.
It's true.
It's a good way to add that flavor into your world, into your campaign. So that's a situation I thought it could be used in that was pretty cool.
And when it dies, it explodes in lava, giving everyone 2/6 extra fire damage, which apparently fire damage is just my thing today, because I think that's great. creatures that are still dangerous when they die are very, or that are super. I like, because I love the concept of something backed into a corner being more dangerous. So something that has an ability that procs when it dies or when it gets to low HP. Just, fantastic.
Well, I think that's going to be it for episode 1.
I think that, oh my gosh, it went by so fast.
It did. It went by so fast. However, I do think 4 might have been a little too much. I think we might have dragged it a little too long with 4. I think maybe next time we do 3. So, Cryo, why don't you roll us our first?
Here we go. Generating 507. What is 507 on our list? What monster will we be tangling with next time? Oh,
that is Drow Priestess of Loth.
Ooh, that's
Drow Priestess of Loth.
Drow Priestess. That's a humanoid character too. That's not like what we had here.
And
that's gonna be fun.
It's a priestess, so we're gonna have a god to talk about. That'll be fun to talk about.
619.
619. We get to talk about the age-old master of D&D, the Beholder.
Yeah!
Yes!
Let's go! And last but not least, 322.
322. For those of you who don't know, we have a list of monsters that we're going
We
down
do.
with.
Several hundred monsters. So this is going to be fun.
Let me see.
Plenty of episode material for the future.
One more time.
D&D does
322.
322, yes.
Oh, cool.
It's
it's another humanoid. It's a GIF.
Oh, a GIF?
Yeah, GIFF. GIF.
It's pronounced GIF. I'm kidding.
Okay. All right.
Well, we're gonna read up on all of those monsters and get you all our pleasant ideas on how they can kill you and your party.
In the meantime, you guys can do the same. I mean, you know what we're gonna talk about next week. You guys get to look forward to it, and make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that follow button.
Hit that fun little bell, and you'll know the next time anything shows up on this channel, including DM4DM.
And don't forget to follow our socials down below in the description. So
that's true.
Thank you guys for coming by. We'll see you next week.